Good evening. Grace and peace to you this evening. I am Nathan Arledge. I'm one of the pastors here at Myers Park United Methodist Church. I am thrilled to have us all gathered as one body in Christ this evening so we can learn, so we can grow, so that we can continue to live differently in this world as God has called us. I am pleased that we can be here for such an important conversation and know that your hearts are ready and churning to engage as well. And so I just encourage us all to listen and to hear where God is speaking this evening. Now for some housekeeping matters. If you need the restroom, please, you can leave the side entrances and go around and you'll see the restroom sides. There'll be somebody there to guide you as well. And if you need water, the water fountain's out there too. It's my privilege now to welcome Ray McKinnon, who serves at South Tryon Community United Methodist Church, our sister congregation. There we go.
Thank you. We're so honored to have each of you here. We know that God has called us to do some incredible work and that justice is a part of it. I want to read right now from Micah 6, verses 7 through 8. Should we offer him thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Should we sacrifice our firstborn children to pay for our sins? No, O people. The Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you: to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Pray with me. God of justice, God of love, God of mercy, we come to you this evening thanking you for the opportunity we have together in this space, recognizing that we come from different backgrounds, we come from different convictions, but we pray that as we're gathered today that you would speak, and after you speak, we would hear, and after we hear, we would act, that we would, in fact, do justice, love mercy, and walk with humility. Amen. I want to invite up now Reverend Clifford, who's the pastor at Myers Park Pres.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you. Tonight's a miraculous night. It's really a night of true reconciliation, because never have this many Presbyterians and Methodists been in the same room today and not fought over parking spaces in our respective buildings. So really is a miracle, and only Michael and Yulise Waters could make that happen. So we are blessed tonight by the presence of Dallas's dynamic duo for justice and racial equity. They are a powerhouse in the city of Dallas. Yulise Waters is an assistant city attorney and a community courts prosecutor for the city of Dallas. She's a co-founder of the Second Chance Community Improvement Program Court. It's the first ever felony community court in Dallas County. She was recently awarded a Community Court Grant Program Award from the United States Department of Justice for that work. Her legal background is family law and collaborative practice and mediation. She's a graduate of Southern Methodist University in Dallas. She earned a BA, get this, in both English and Spanish, both magna cum laude, as well as a Bachelor of Business Administration, and that was magna cum laude, so I don't know what the rest of us slackers were doing in our undergraduate work. She was awarded the SMU Department of English's Shakespeare Prize and was named overall top woman of the campus. Her Juris Doctorate degree came from the Dedman School of Law at SMU. She served as vice president there of the SMU Black Law Students Association, and that chapter during her time as a leader there was named Chapter of the Year by the National Black Law Students Association. She's a committed community servant and engaged in multiple initiatives on behalf of underserved communities. Yulise's husband is the Reverend Dr. Michael Waters. I really wanted to say that, Michael, just to describe her that way. Yulise, I first met her, by the way, when she saved my life after Michael and I were part of an interfaith prayer chain between some white nationalists protesting a Nation of Islam mosque and the New Black Panther Party and the Huey Newton Gun Club. She saved our lives, or she saved my life. I look like Mr. Rogers there in the middle of that. Reverend Dr. Michael Waters is the founding pastor of the Joy Tabernacle African Methodist Episcopal Church in Dallas. He is a pastor, a professor, an award-winning author, an activist, and a social commentator. He has published 2 nationally recognized books. Freestyle was the first, Reflections on Faith, Family, Justice, and Pop Culture, about hip-hop and what that has to say about the state of our society. And then the book that we're here tonight to hear more about, Stakes is High, Race, Faith, and Hope for America. And he has a 3rd book on the way, For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World, and that's going to be published by Westminster John Knox Press. He's appeared on numerous national television shows, from the PBS NewsHour to Vice on HBO. How about that for a spectrum? He's been featured in multiple national publications and websites, from the Washington Post to the Huffington Post. I'm pretty sure he has not appeared in the New York Post, which is a good thing. But I'm going to list a few of his accolades so we know who we're hearing tonight. He has received the White House Presidential Youth Service Award, the Harold M. Kaufman Award in Social Ethics, the Community Leader of the Year Award by the Council on American Islamic Relations, Pastor of the Year from the Center for Theological Activism's Justice Awards, the Dallas Business Journal's 40 Under 40 recognition. I was never cool enough to make that in Dallas. The William K. McIlvaney Award in Peace and Justice, and he received the highest honor of his alma mater, Southern Methodist University's Distinguished Alumni Emerging Leader Award. Friends, he has spoken across the nation. He's spoken at Duke Divinity School, the World Methodist Conference. He even opened a recent session of the United States House of Representatives, which we're going to hear. Thank God they need that prayer, Michael. And tonight we are blessed to get to hear this dynamic duo. Friends, please join me in welcoming Yulise Reeves Waters and her husband, the Reverend Michael Waters.
Joe, I thank you, because that's the best introduction I've ever received. To be introduced as Yulise's husband. I tell people that Yulise is evidence to me that angels exist and that they sometimes walk upon the earth. And so very grateful for the tremendous partner in life and in ministry, and the opportunity to journey together in ways that we hope provide holistic solutions to the challenges that are facing our society.
Thank you so much for each and every one of you who has come here this evening. It's interesting because the paths that we have found ourselves walking is not anything that we necessarily endeavored to do, but because of the heart that God has given us, and because of the passions that we both have. As you heard, my background is actually in family law, and whenever I was asked previously about what area of law I would practice, I would always say, never criminal law, ever, ever. But it's funny how when we say never, God says, ah ha ha. But we're really hopeful tonight and prayerful tonight that through some of the things that we share, that your hearts are stirred, that your minds are enlightened, and that your spirits are empowered and invigorated to move forward in your own spheres of influence, to continue this work of justice that, we believe Christ even began. Yeah? Indeed.
I want you to applaud all the individuals who came together to make this night possible, if you will. And it's very important because this room, this space, already speaks not only to the magnitude of the issues before us, but of your willingness to receive and grow together. So even before we begin our odyssey tonight, I believe that we are a success because you've pressed your way into this space. Now let's deal with some hard stuff. Tonight is a night of a courageous conversation. And I'm not here to allow you to leave here patting yourself on the back. It's a courageous conversation, and I must tell you, if we do it the right way, there are times during our journey tonight where you will be discomforted. where you will be disturbed. I'm going to ask you not to check out in those moments, not to turn us off, but for us to power through together, because I believe there's something great and divine that we're pressing towards. A Greek word that we find in Philippians, where it talks about I press toward the mark, that word is dioko. And in many ways, that word means that we press against everything pressing against us. So in order to be successful tonight, we're going to have to press through some things together. But if we don't check out, I believe we'll arrive where we want to be, at least in a way that will lead us forward to future work. So as we begin tonight, there's something that we must do. And I want us to pray, so let us bow. Eternal God, we thank you for being present here with us tonight. I pray that you would open our hearts and our minds to receive, in fact, what the Spirit desires to impart to us tonight. God, give us the courage to listen and give us the courage to build together. It's our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. And so I want to begin by acknowledging the fact that we're really standing on stolen land. Can't really have a conversation about race and reconciliation and justice without acknowledging the genocide of indigenous people within America. And these are just a few of the nations that, in my research, I found had a homestead here in the Charlotte area. And so I want to acknowledge that reality again, that we're on stolen land and what that means for our journey forward. Also, there's something very personal for me today. There was a gentleman by the name of William Leake, born here in North Carolina in the mid-19th century. It's a man born into slavery, a preaching man, who began his ministry while preaching to his slave masters on the plantation. After the American Civil War had concluded, he then journeyed from North Carolina to Central Texas, where he began working as an itinerant circuit riding preacher. Although he himself was uneducated, he was one of 4 individuals who founded Paul Quinn College, the oldest historically black college in west of the Mississippi River. According to the Centennial Encyclopedia of the AME Church, during his ministry, over 5,000 individuals entered into the work of the church. He happened to be my great-great-great-grandfather. So we see an arc of history. And for me to stand in the place where my great-great-great-grandfather was enslaved and began his ministry, seems like God is up to something, that God would allow us to journey here together. So let's begin. Okay. We're going to start off with a video, and we have several videos I'd like for us to look at and listen to together as we go forward.
Pastor Michael Waters is joining us now. Pastor Waters was one of the organizers helping to lead yesterday's peaceful protest. Pastor, what did you see?
For the initial part of our gathering, I saw a beautiful picture of America. A person of every race, every creed, young and old, who will come together to express their concern for several tragedies taking part in this nation. And so we had a very peaceful rally, a very peaceful march, and we're dispersing individuals now to return to their vehicles when gunshots were fired.
It was over. The march was ending.
The march had concluded. We had a moment of silence and reflection for lives that were lost. We gave directions that were given to us by the Dallas Police Department in terms of how to disperse, and individuals were literally casually walking back to their vehicles.
When the gunfire broke out. What did you see? What did you hear?
Initially, I didn't hear the gunfire. I was on the side watching as individuals were passing. What I saw first was this mass of humanity running back in my direction. And my instinct told me that I needed to move wherever they were moving, and we took cover. And it was only after we had taken cover that we continued to hear gunshots take place and decided to move to greater safety.
How would you characterize the gunshots?
They were random. I mean, obviously in a scene like that, the concern is where are they coming from? Who is shooting? No one knows. A very peaceful scene turned chaotic very quickly.
Was there anything in the protest march that might have set off this violence?
Nothing that I saw, nothing that I was aware of. In fact, the police officers who accompanied us did a tremendous job in ensuring that we were safe. We were in direct conversation and collaboration to make sure that all persons who participated in the march stayed within the bounds of that march. It was a beautiful night, and it was as we were dispersing that this tragedy unfolded.
Pastor Waters, thank you very much. Thanks for being with us.
Our second video.
Has cried out. Our souls have cried out to God. How long must we deal with the stain of police brutality? The name Jordan has rung out. Our hearts have been broken over and over again. And oftentimes, although after the fact, we desired to protect that young soul, so our souls have sung aloud, "Get away, Jordan. Get away from that party. Get away, Jordan. Drive swifter. Get away, Jordan. Get away from Oliver's gun." Yet Jordan is no more. But he did get away. Away from the evils of this world. Away from the racism that passes down from generation to generation as America's greatest inheritance. Away from evil itself.
Here's a sincere question. Yes, sir. What would have happened to my people had the South won? I have no idea. What would have happened to my people had the South won? But that's like saying, had the South won? They would have been shipped back to Africa because Lincoln said that he wanted to do that. Exactly. He is on record saying had the South won. Hold on. Think common sense.
It was on its way out as it was.
What would have happened to my people had the South won?
My ancestors were dirt
But
poor.
Slavery would have died by 1890.
Hold on. I'm answering your question.
My people had the South won.
Hello, I'm answering your question.
What would have happened to my people?
My ancestors were dirt poor.
This is not a dialogue.
Hold on. No.
What would have, this is a very simple question. The answer is they would have remained in slavery. The answer is they would not have been free. The problem is, that is the answer.
That's the answer you're wanting. That is the answer that you're wanting.
You are attempting to rewrite history.
No, we are not trying to rewrite history. You're the one changing it.
Lincoln is on record saying this.
Yes.
That he would ship all Africans back because they were not equal.
Thank you.
Lincoln said this because he was a tyrant. Thank you.
You get the partial answer you want and you walk off.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, like I was saying.
Construe everything we said. They were not equal.
Correct. We were not equal.
We didn't say that.
Said that.
Lincoln, you're
My
great
family
emancipator.
did not say that. My family fought side by side. No.
So why do you carry that flag?
Because this is my heritage. My family fought to save their farm under this flag.
Who was working that farm?
My
family was.
Who was working the farm?
They were poor. Do you know how much a slave cost back then?
Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. No times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Well, I wish I was in Dixie. Hooray, hooray! In Dixieland, I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Woo! God bless the Confederacy.
Are you uncomfortable yet? First video was from the morning of July 8th, after the deaths of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. I joined over 1,000 persons meeting in Belo Park in downtown Dallas to comfort ourselves as well as prepare ourselves for the next leg in the movement for justice as it relates to policing in this nation. What was a peaceful rally and a peaceful march was met with great violence. I had an opportunity to provide a benediction, and individuals were literally casually walking on their way back to their vehicles. And then the gunshots began. My wife and I, along with several others, ran and hid behind a pillar, not knowing from whence the bullets were coming, ultimately fleeing down to the Omni Hotel with about 50 others in that space, fleeing for our lives. Only to learn later that a gunman was targeting police officers who had been protecting us in the midst of that march, and 5 officers were killed. That second video comes from April into May of last year, 2017. A gentleman by the name of Jordan Edwards, 15 years old, was leaving a party along with his brother and cousins. They had heard a gunshot in the distance and decided that it was appropriate that they move from that space to greater safety. As they were pulling off, Officer Roy Oliver pulled out his rifle from his car, his cruiser, and shot indiscriminately into the passenger side window, hitting young Jordan Edwards in the forehead. This A honor roll student athlete died in the vehicle while his brothers and cousins watched. Ultimately, the police department suggested that the car was moving in Roy Oliver's direction, and so he was firing as an act of self-defense. But once they saw the video, the car was moving in the opposite direction from the officer. And he decided to do the unthinkable, which was to aim his rifle at a child and shoot. The last video is from this August, downtown across from City Hall in the Dallas Convention Center, where we initially had gathered for a rally of those who thought that Confederate monuments should come down, and we were met in that space by members of the Neo-Confederates and the KKK. And while they allowed every other speaker to speak that night, when I approached and began to speak, they encroached and began to shout me down. So I decided to engage in a dialogue with them about the meaning of these images and why they are so harmful to many black people. I want to move on to this man, James Baldwin. If you don't know his work, I suggest that you become acquainted with it. He says to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all of the time. The vernacular of today means that if you are a woke person and a black person, there's more than enough that you see and encounter on a daily basis to cause you to be in a rage. Now, I want to consider a few things, Yulise and I together tonight, of some challenges that are facing black Americans. And I must say that there are a number of challenges, but for the time that we have allotted for tonight, I want to talk, or we want to talk, primarily about two things. One is poverty, the other is mass incarceration. Now let's establish some realities that many have blamed these conditions, whether it be poverty, mass incarcerations, or others, on a perceived black pathology. That there is something inherently wrong within black Americans and within their systems, their institutions, that brings about these realities. And if black people would simply face and fix their problems, those problems would leave. However, as our thesis tonight, this perspective belies a more sinister reality. These realities, poverty, mass incarceration, and so many others, are but symptomatic of intentional acts of racism that have been carried out for centuries, manifest in public policy and state-sanctioned terror. That is to suggest tonight that it is all by design. A gentleman by the name of Twiggy Garcon who says these words, "In order to correct it, it is the challenges that are before us, we must dismantle systems of oppression in order to build a world of radical equity and liberation." I pray that's what we will do tonight. So let's talk about black poverty. You advance it again. As we've traveled across the nation sharing from this book and sharing with a number of communities, one of the interesting things that I've had an opportunity to do is to pull the redlining maps of the communities and municipalities that we are speaking to. This, in fact, is a redlining map from Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, I am not as well versed as most of you are, clearly, in the design of the city. But what I have found to be often the case is that wherever the red lines are, as drawn in these redlining maps, one or two things are happening today. Either those are the areas where poverty remains in those cities, and poverty has now grown exponentially from those spaces, and or those are the spaces where gentrification is taking place. Is that accurate? That's accurate here, okay? So one or two things are happening based upon this design. Either poverty is still there and increasing, or gentrification is happening. So let's just deal with the picture of poverty in black America. 27.4% of black people live in poverty. Okay, that's the highest percentage among all racial and ethnic groups in America. Now, the median wealth of a white family today is $141,000 and rising. Those statistics that came to us from 2010 to 2013, where it increased from $138,000 to $141,000. That's the median wealth of a white family in America. Over that same time frame, 2010 to 2013, the median wealth of a black family in America decreased from $15,000 to $11,000. As a matter of fact, economists tell us that it would take 228 years for the wealth of both communities to equate to one another. And that is only if the median wealth of white families do not increase. So if white family median wealth remained the same now until 228 years from now, only then is it possible for black median wealth to be the same. Let's share some more things. The greatest indicator of wealth is not education. We thought that was the case. It's not even earning power. Matter of fact, the greatest way or the greatest indicator of wealth is wealth transfer from one generation to the next. So generally speaking, white families pass on assets and black families pass on debt. But that's not about black pathology. That's about design. Not only that, but black Americans represent roughly 13% of the general population of America, but they make up roughly 40% of the homeless population. So let's look at what our forebears left us with. This redlining map. A place of segregation, a place of great poverty, where black people were forced into certain portions of our city and were unable to get home loans, unable to get business loans, unable to participate in the wealth of this nation, unable to grow through the blessing of home ownership, wealth. See, owning a home is the very foundation, you know this, of the assets by which we seek to grow and pass down from generation to generation. What happens when you shut out a whole people from that process? What happens when you intentionally and by design keep people from participating in the economic and wealth building of this nation? You hear me say this over and over again, and I want you to understand this, I want you to accept this, but black poverty comes from intentionality. Furthermore, let us recognize that the persons who set forth this map were right Christians. People who believed in Jesus. We're going to talk about who that Jesus might be in a little while. But people who may have even gathered in sacred spaces such as this left these spaces to do damage to generations of black Americans. Poverty is not by happenstance. It's not about lazy people. They're working poor all across this nation, holding 3 jobs and still falling below the poverty line. Black poverty in America is by design. Furthermore, as I press on, there's an issue as it relates to black employment, okay? Another means by which to make an earning, make a living, and to pass out assets and to be a blessing to your family. Well, listen to this. In America, you find all of this in the book. Statistics cited, noted by economists and others. In America, a black college graduate has the same job prospects as a white high school dropout or a white person with a prison record. Matter of fact, in 2014, among black people who were unemployed, 23.7% had attended college, 15.4% had bachelor's degrees, and 4.5% had advanced degrees. Disturbingly, by percentage alone, there are more unemployed blacks with advanced degrees than there are unemployed Asians overall. Let's talk about the hourly wage gap between black men and white men today. Is $6, $21 versus $15. And for black women who happen to be, black American women, the most educated people group in the entire world, they earn just $13 per hour. $4, in fact, beneath their white counterparts, white women, at $17. Only Asian men and Asian women out-earn everyone at $24 and $18, respectively. Now let's deal with callbacks. Even for those working menial jobs or working in administrative jobs or seeking to be contacted back for factory jobs. For black Americans who have a criminal record, the callback rate is 5%. 5% if you are a black American with a criminal record that you'll get called back for that job. For a black American with no criminal record, the callback is 14%. For a white American with a criminal record, the callback is 17%. What do we say about a nation wherein you can be a black American, degreed, without a criminal record, and yet the likelihood of you being employed when compared to a white American with a criminal record is less than likely? These are just a few of the unfortunate and uncomfortable realities that continue to shift and impact the economic legacy of our nation today. And all of this extends from the legacy of slavery within this nation. Yulise is going to come and talk a little bit from the perspective of mass incarceration and the legal system, but I want to leave you with this. When American slavery was ended in America, $4 billion in assets were lost. This nation would not be who it is today if it did not build its economic power on the backs of black people.
So when we start to think about and discuss the criminal justice system, and we think about what does a criminal look like? What does crime look like? The unfortunate reality is that many in this country, white, black, Latino, however, see the face of crime as a person of color. How many of you have walked down a dark street and passed a person of color and maybe just gripped yourself a little bit? I know I have. Not happy to mention it, to say it, but it speaks to how the narrative has shaped our perceptions of one another. How many of you have been on an elevator and it was you and one other person of color? Let's make it a male person of color. And let's make it a female. How many of you have felt uncomfortable, a little threatened? Not necessarily because there was an actual threat, but just because that person just seemed a little intimidating. That, my friends, is too by design. A lot of times when we have conversations about mass incarceration and the war on drugs, we kind of begin talking about Reagan and even Nixon. But political scientists and historians are starting to unearth a number of policies that were in place well before Reagan and Nixon. It's very ironic that at the time that LBJ was signing the Civil Rights Act, he was also putting forth legislation for the Law Enforcement Assistance Act. How many of you have heard of that? The Law Enforcement Assistance Act, which created the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, put forth billions of dollars to infiltrate state and local government. And under that administration, they identified crime as coming from the inner city, as characterized by poverty. And the interesting fact is that prior to LBJ, Kennedy had done a lot of social programs, and the idea was to be able to infiltrate the cities, the inner cities, the place where poverty existed, with services to help sort of shore up folks. And as LBJ was signing the Civil Rights Act, those social programs went away and it was replaced with intensive law enforcement. So the challenge here is that at a time where you didn't really have a whole lot of statistical data about crime, the narrative about crime became that it was the inner city, that it was people of color, and that we needed to militarize these communities so that we can stop crime. It's a little disturbing. Not only that, when you have these communities where folks are feeling militarized, where it's difficult to make ends meet, where society shuts you out on a regular basis, when you're in your own community, walking down the street, and you have law enforcement personnel who have been commissioned to stop and frisk, who have been commissioned to identify you because of the color of your skin as a potential threat. I think that does merit a little unrest. Unfortunately, that unrest only fueled these administrations. You have the Watts riots, you have other riots, you have different music artists coming out speaking violently or speaking adamantly against the police, and that sort of perpetuates this narrative that those inner city communities, they're against police. And if you look back over the history, you'll see over and over and over again how law enforcement has been used to stifle communities. Now, obviously, I work for the city attorney's office. I'm with police officers. I am a huge supporter of police officers. And unfortunately, many of those who are in the force don't know this history and don't recognize the system within which they operate. And so it's really a sad story for all of our communities when we're not able to coexist and to live together, to work together. So some of you have seen this movie, 13th, yeah? And it talks about these various systems and how mass incarceration has come about, the horrible treatment of some of our persons who are in the prison system. I think when you start to see some of these numbers, you'll see that it's really disturbing how much traction the war on drugs and the war on crime got. So again, you hear a lot about the war on drugs. And one of the things that political scientists and historians are finding is that at the time that the war on drugs began, there really wasn't as much of a drug issue. But that was one of those issues that could really push political engines so that they could put policing power in communities. And again, remember we talked about the Law Enforcement Act, the Law Enforcement Assistance, the Assistance Act. So with that act, dollars were funneled into local and state governments. So what happens is that some of the local municipalities, police chiefs and things like that, recognize that the more crime we can say is here, the more federal dollars we can get. So as we increase our crime numbers, so how are we going to increase crime numbers? Well, you know what? Why don't we do more traffic stops? Why don't we go out and stop more people? Why don't we go out and uncover these crimes so that we can increase our crime statistics so we can get federal dollars to support this initiative? A little disturbing, huh? So we've talked about Nixon already, and again, like I say, this new system of oppression started well before Nixon, but he's the one that's kind of getting most of the attention about it, particularly because one of his aides came out and said, yeah, the war on drugs was really about stifling black folks and putting black folks in jail, and the hippies too, because we didn't really like them either. So that's what the war on drugs was about. But if you look at this diagram here, you can see how incarceration spikes about the 1980s. So literally, you can see on the timeline where President Nixon proclaims that drug abuse is public enemy #1. Remember, even though drug abuse really wasn't that big of an issue at the time. And then Reagan comes through and declares a war on drugs, and from there you see the numbers skyrocket. But the interesting fact is that some of those crimes that they thought were really, really horrible crimes, they found that white youth were also getting incarcerated. So we decided to not treat those crimes as bad. And then we started to identify young people of color as potential threats. So even though you had a young person of color who had not committed a crime, had not had engagement with law enforcement, simply because of the color of their skin, they became a potential threat. Currently, there are 2.2 million people incarcerated. 2.2 million people who are behind bars, who don't have contact with loved ones, who are not in our workforce, or actually they kind of are, but that's a whole nother conversation. It's very interesting to think of that because the US makes up 5% of the entire world population, yet we represent 25% of the entire incarcerated population in the world. Marinate on that a little bit. 5%, but we make up 25% of incarcerated individuals in the world. Again, you see here how with a lot of the studies going forward about mass incarceration and the war on drugs and the implications, you can see how there's been a lot of reform to try to decrease these numbers of folks who have been incarcerated. When you look at the numbers going from 1980 to 2015, and all of these are coming from the Sentencing Project, which is a nonprofit organization that works very diligently on trying to reform the justice system. So let's talk about lifetime likelihood of imprisonment. For all men, 1 in 9 persons, 1 in 9 men will be incarcerated at some point. For white men, 1 in 17. For black men, 1 in 3. For Latino men, 1 in 6. For all women, 1 in 56. For white women, 1 in 111. For black women, 1 in 18. Now listen to that statistics, because you heard my husband already speak that black women are the most educated in the world, yet we can be incarcerated 1 in 18. So it's not an issue of education, it's an issue of race. And Latino women, 1 in 45. What does it mean to know that the color of your skin could land you behind bars? What does it mean to know that because of the color of your skin, the likelihood of your ability to earn income is significantly reduced, so that if you do happen to get incarcerated because of the color of your skin, the likelihood of your being able to post bail to get out to return to the 3 jobs that you're working is very limited, which means that you'll likely lose the 1 or all of the 3 jobs that you've been working and find yourself homeless. What does it mean for that to be your reality?
So one of the challenges we deal with is, why is it the case that black life in America is expendable? Why is it that it appears as though black pigmentation allows you to be readily discarded? Do black lives matter? Can we affirm that they do, not just verbally, but by what we see in society? Or is it clear that things are designed in a way that black lives may not matter as much as other lives do? Can we even say that for the church? Black lives may not really matter as much to the Christian faithful as we would like to think. So New York Times in 2015 put forth an alarming statistic. April of 2015, they said that there were 1.5 million black men between the ages of 25 and 54 who were missing from American society. I want you to hear that number again. 1.5 million black men who are missing in American society between the ages of 25 and 54. The reason 25 and 54 is such an important number is because that suggested that those are the prime years of a man's working life, and yet they're missing. Except they're not missing. We know exactly where they are. They're largely in prison, or they're dead. And if you still think this is about black pathology, we have failed you tonight. Something very harsh and sinister in the design of American society that continues to pull black men from their communities. Not only that, but again, black women are the fastest growing group of incarcerates in America. Do black lives matter? Do black lives matter to the church? I want us to look at something here. First of all, this is Frederick Douglass. Our president says he's doing a good job. I want to ask you again, are all these statistics evidence of a Christian nation? I mean, would you footnote these statistics by saying Christ reigns? Frederick Douglass would join you in that. Let me read something to you from his autobiography. He said, "I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial and hypocritical Christianity of the land. I look upon it as the climax of all misnomers, the boldest of all frauds, and the grossest of all libels. Never was there a clearer case of stealing the livery of the court of heaven to serve the devil in. I am filled with loathing when I contemplate the religious pomp and show, together with the horrible inconsistencies which everywhere surround me. We have men stealers for ministers, women whippers for missionaries, and cradle plunderers for church members. The man who welds the blood clot cowskin during the week, fills the pulpit on Sunday, and claims to be a minister of the meek and lowly Jesus. The slave auctioner's bell, the church-going bell, chime with each other. The dealers in the bodies of men erect their stand in the presence of the pulpit, and they mutually help each other. The dealer gives his blood-stained gold to support the pulpit, and the pulpit in return covers his business with the garb of Christianity. Here we have religion and robbery, the allies of each other, devils dressed in angels' robes, and hell presenting a semblance of paradise. And if you are not already uncomfortable, this is where we get really uncomfortable. That American Christianity can largely be defined as the worship of white Jesus. And the worship of white Jesus is no more than the worship of white supremacy. there has been no institution that has done more damage to society than the American church. What happens when you create God in your image? Your God hates what you hate, loves what you love, and sets norms that work in your favor. Matter of fact, if I were to ask you to close your eyes right now, I don't care if you were a black person, white person, Latino, or Asian, if you have grown up in the American enterprise, if I asked you to close your eyes right now and image Jesus, the image that might most readily come to the fore of your mind is a Eurocentric Jesus. Blue eyes, blonde hair. And if that is the Jesus you serve, you worship a Jesus of white supremacy. It begins to make sense now why some lives don't matter as much as other lives, because we don't necessarily see those lives as being shaped and created in the image of God. Let's talk about how deep our worship of white supremacy goes. Can you imagine that even in death, we separated black corpses from white corpses? Because even in death, one corpse was deemed as greater. Can you imagine that we told slaves for generations to work hard for your masters so you can go to heaven, but you won't go to the same heaven as your master? You'll be in black heaven. A little bit lesser than the heaven in which we will abide. Let's push it further. How is it that Confederate monuments are actually an issue? Where else in the history of the world have we built monuments to traitors? Tell me what is so pure and righteous about holding human beings captive. How can you be such a good man and yet hold and separate generations of families? Could it be that somehow in America, whiteness covers a multitude of sins? That we erect monuments to white supremacy. We etch white supremacy at the bottom of them. We set them up in front of courthouses and city squares to serve as a reminder that the Civil War may have concluded, but you are not free. See, as we're dealing with race in America, as we deal with it from the state of poverty as well as the state of incarceration, might I say that our real problem is not so much a social problem as it is a theological one. About the God that we serve. This 1.5 million, you can stay right there. If you go to the next one. That 1.5 million, if you add all of the wars in America together, all the casualties of war, 1.5 million is greater than them all. And might I say, war on black flesh has been the greatest war in American history. It is theological. You see that Jeremiah 11:3-6, cursed is the man who integrates. I feel like I'm speaking somewhat to those who may have even lived this reality and experience, who know well what had happened to create the society in which we live. Let's press on. This gentleman is by the name of Cain Hopefelder. Do you know him? If you don't know him, you need to know him. Esteemed Professor Emeritus at the Howell Divinity School, a master of New Testament and biblical hermeneutics, wrote the foreword to my dad's book. I would recommend it to you. Afrocentric Sermons, The Beauty of Blackness in the Bible. And really he argues that we have to rescue our sacred text, and we've got to rescue our faith from the impact of white supremacy. So here, as we're going to a conclusion, because really we want to spend some time talking, I see the wheels turning. I think there's some things you may agree with. There may be some things that you disagree with. I want to provide an opportunity to engage those things tonight. But I promise you, this is a night of hope. We get into the hope. I promise you it is. But I want you to see this picture. This is the picture that was before us as we gathered that fateful night, July 7, 2016. This is my vantage point of that evening. I'm going to leave that up there for now. And we're going to open it up for questions. What have you heard? What do you feel based upon what you have heard? Where are you pushing back? Where are you receptive? What have you heard that you agree with? What have you heard that you disagree with? What have you heard that you would like to know more? You see, body language is an amazing thing. And as you are looking here in our direction, I really have the best seat in the house. And what I have seen, family, is as we've gone through the night, you've gotten a little tenser. The space was jovial, joyful as we entered in. A little heavy now. See, arms folded, people closed in together. But again, let's press through together because there's hope on the other side. Let's talk. What are your thoughts? What have you heard? You already knew. What have you heard that you're pushing against? What have you heard that you may not have heard before? We want to listen to you now. Yes, sir.
So, what I heard you say, and I don't know if you can hear me. Hello, doctor. I happen to be one of those statistics that you talked about.
Yes, sir.
Meaning, and there were a lot of statistics. So I am an Ivy League educated black man who has never been arrested. Yet I moved to Charlotte and could not find work. So I live the reality that you talked about. But my question is a little different, and it's really for Dr. Yulise Waters. And that is, given what you do for your profession, how do you reconcile the knowledge that you bring to the work that you do with, for all intents and purposes, being a part of the justice system that in fact propagates the incarceration of people that look like you, your husband, and me?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. And I think I will switch it so that I can, if you don't mind just switching it for me. So the unique aspect of my work is that I'm not a traditional prosecutor. I am a prosecutor in community courts, and community courts are neighborhood-focused courts that harness the power of the justice system to transform people's lives and to impact society at a greater level. And so one of the ways in which I'm able to practice is being a prosecutor and almost wearing both a law enforcement hat and a social services hat. So in community courts, we do wraparound services, and one of the courts that I had the privilege of co-founding, which you heard in my bio early, is the Second Chance Community Improvement Program Court. This court came out of a pilot program that me and 2 other colleagues established because at the time, as community prosecutors in our respective divisions of Dallas, our chiefs came to us and asked us the question, what can we do about this revolving door system? We arrest folks for these low-level crimes, they go in, they get out on the streets, and they keep doing it over and over again. So I'll quickly kind of go through this because then I think this will answer your question. So the Second Chance Community Improvement Program Court is the first ever felony community court in Dallas County. And one of the things that we like to share with folks is that even though no one can go back and make a brand new start, anyone can start from now and make a brand new ending. And that's one of the things that we share with our folks. So with the Second Chance Court, we focus on, this is some of the team here, this is some of the partners that we have. We focus on individuals ages 18 to 30. The court was established in 2014, and we got the grant from the Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance to establish the court as an effective community court. We focus on 4 different zip codes, and the reason that we focus on zip codes is because we want that impact that we make on the individuals' lives to impact the community. And so our program is 9 to 18 months long. Like I said, we have folks who are 18 to 30 who have both felonies and misdemeanors. A person can complete the program in 9 months, but usually when they get in, they recognize that there's a lot more work to do, and so it usually takes longer than 9. We go through 3 phases, the stabilization phase, the motivational phase, and the actualization phase. And we partner with neighborhood stakeholders to be able to provide resources to our participants so that we can get them on a path towards a vision. Really quickly, just some quick facts. So you saw that we do nonviolent offenders. It's drug and drug-related offenses. What we found in connecting with the Dallas Police Department is that in those 4 zip codes were some of the highest drug and drug-related offenses in the city. And so we work with them. If they are on drugs, we give them drug treatment. If they don't have housing, we work to get them housing. If they don't have job skills, many of them do not, we work to get them job skills and then to get them employed. And at the end of their time in our court program, their cases are dismissed and expunged, immediately expunged. And so that's one of the ways that we're working to intercept these folks from the school-to-prison pipeline, as well as to reclaim our young people. You heard my husband speak earlier about that statistic of black men between the ages of 25 and 54, is it 54? 25 and 54, we're catching some of those young folks who are approaching that 25-year-old range. A lot of times when you hear statistics about folks who are adolescents, you would think that that number ends at 24. So recent statistics say that adolescence goes from age 10 to age 24. What we find in impoverished communities is that there's such a lack of resources, and not just resources in terms of social services, but just food deserts. And without nutrition, it does not stimulate brain power the same way. In addition, how many of you have heard of the ACEs score? Oh, good, this is a good number. So ACEs, for those of you who have not heard of it, is a recent study that's called Adverse Childhood Experiences. It talks about how trauma for young children can impact them both in terms of brain function and in terms of like mental health, but also physical health. They found that kids who have a ACEs score of 4 or more are more likely to develop depression, diabetes, heart disease, and even some cancers. So when we start talking about the folks that we deal with in our zip codes, recognizing that many of them have been exposed to tremendous trauma at a very, very early age. Many of them have not had resources and access to mental health services, just pure counseling. We had one instance where one of our church members who reached out and wanted to partner with our local elementary school. She was having trouble with the elementary school. She was going out and having lunch, 4th grade girls. And she came to me, she said, First Lady, that's what she called me, First Lady, I'm just having a difficult time. What can I do? Because I can't get their attention and they're fighting with each other. I said, you know what? Just ask them, how can you pray for them? And she looked at me and she said, huh? I said, just ask them, how can you pray for them? I bet you find out a lot more information than you ever thought you would. And she did. And one of the young girls, 4th grade, said, you know what, Miss So-and-so? Can you pray that I stop stabbing a doorknob with a knife? 4th grade. What's happening in that baby's household to where her outlet is to get a knife and stab the doorknob? And where is she getting mental health services? What counselor is she talking to about what she's experiencing? So those are some of the things that we do with our court program, and that's what I do on a regular basis. So like I said, I'm not a traditional prosecutor. I'm a prosecutor in a problem-solving court that seeks to reverse the issues and put folks on a new trajectory. I can go through the rest of it later unless you wanted to take some more questions.
Well, one of the things I think is most important, which is why I believe that Yulise's Court is the best thing going on in Dallas, is that somewhere in the range of 90% of the participants, of course, who had one foot moving in the direction of incarceration, are now either completing their GED or enrolled in college. And so it's a court and its approach that is saving lives.
Thank you for being here. Oh, God, I am so glad I didn't go to Raleigh tonight. I'm State Representative Cunningham, and I do a lot of work in mental health. And one of the things that North Carolina has not picked up and focused on is early childhood trauma and ACEs. We are just beginning to talk about it. And my concern is we are so far behind, and knowing that the brain needs to be recoiled, not 3 to 5, but 0 to 3, is where we can work with the children and get them from being that pipeline to prison. And that is where I'm at with the poverty, with the food deserts. We're just not there yet, and we're not having enough conversations in our state around that. And I just don't, I get frustrated because I'm trying to figure out how do you get people there to start looking at the early years of a child and how that can change the community and how the community succeeds in being successful. So can you?
Sure. One of the things that I had to learn very quickly in the city is that because of all of the bureaucracy and the politics that surrounds those kinds of issues, really the way to start is just to start. And I say that, I know it sounds very simple. When we started this court, we did not go to the county funders to say, hey, we have this idea, we know this will work, this is great. Literally, we, after talking with the Dallas Police Department, recognizing what we wanted to do, we went straight to a judge and said, this is what we want to do, can you sign on? And he signed on, and we started the court with absolutely $0. It was everybody's heart and passion and willingness to do the work. So I tell people often, I have a full-time job that is separate from the Second Chance Court, but this court is a full-time job as well, but we do it because we believe in the power of it, and now we're starting to see the fruit to get the numbers to be able to get the funding to go forward. So what I would suggest, and and maybe you've had this idea already, is that if you're able to find at least just one school or one preschool or just one space where you can insert your program, insert your ideas, and to begin to develop and get the data that you need to go forward later and to push that to other policymakers. Does that answer your question at all?
We're doing that.
Oh, awesome.
I think overall at the state level, it's different from being local. I know the Duke Endowment Center is already on board, but we're trying to get the state to start to focus on that with early childhood development. But lastly, and I hate to bring it up, but I have been working with the African American and minority ministers in this city, pulling them together to start addressing ACEs and the trauma, but it seems to be so difficult. What can you recommend to me? It seems like more of the Caucasian society, they're ready, but we're not because of the stigma.
So, absolutely understand where you're coming from there. Huge stigma around mental health for folks of color, which is not necessarily unfounded, because when you start thinking about syphilis studies and a whole number of things where we were mistreated by the medical profession, It'll have to start small. One of the things that I've done previously is shared the TED Talk by Dr. Nadine Burke, which I know you know about, of course, right? So anybody else hasn't seen it, please Google it, ACE's study. The reason I recommend her is because she's African American, and she can speak to it from the place of being both African American and being a physician. My introduction to mental health, I will tell you, I've not always been here, but it came from family law. I was a collaborative law attorney where we pulled together teams of folks, mental health professional, financial professional, to do collaborative divorces. I know, right? A preacher's wife doing divorces, I know. That's a whole nother subject. But it was in my engagement with mental health professionals where I recognized the need and the benefit for mental health. And so I would say, again, if you can start small with those few Black pastors or pastors of color who are willing to hear and to listen and trudge the ground there. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Dr. Waters.
I'm going to hold my statement for a little later. I think that's good.
Okay.
That's good. Right. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. I know you've been standing. Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for being here for tonight, for the conversation. I especially wanted to thank you for your courage in dealing with an angry mob and speaking truth to power and being courageous. Thank you. I have a sense that everybody here would like to do something moving forward to be very positive and proactive and working towards solution. A number of us are on racial reconciliation groups, and we strive to do rather than just sit and throw up our hands. If you would be willing to share a couple of solutions that going forward we can really take to heart. Everyone's busy, doesn't even have to be said, but maybe there's one or two proactive things we can each do, and there's quite a number of people here, so I would think that would make quite an impact as we move forward from this place tonight.
Thank you for your kindness. Let me say something to you. As I was engaging with the gentleman in Pioneer Park, and unfortunately, and I do mean this unfortunately, that scene was memed, and some of you may have saw it on Last Night Tonight with John Oliver. And the gentleman with the flag who I engaged towards the end, who made the statement about my family was poor, do you know how much a slave cost back then? Became the butt of many jokes. If I could tell you, because we were in probably as close as I am now to you, my friend Joe, in proximity, as I looked in his eyes, I saw great pain. And that's what's often missed in our dialogue and the challenge here. And Dr. King may have said it best, is that for so many within the white populace who have been poor, they've been sold this notion of whiteness to give them value and give their life meaning. All the while, the persons who sell them this notion of whiteness put forth policies that prove detrimental to their existence. Dr. King said a long time ago, you read his first book, Stride Toward Freedom, published in 1958, The Montgomery Story, he basically said, he gave this statement. He said he was working as a teenager in a factory, and he was on the ground level, and there were poor black people, poor white people working on the same level, and they looked up at the owners of the factory. And he had an epiphany. He said, if somehow we ever got together down here, black poor and white poor, we can change all of our realities. Seems that this notion of whiteness is rightness that continues to create the divisions on the ground level. Dr. Grant, good to see you.
Classmate, Dr. Mike, Attorney Yulise, wonderful to have you in North Carolina. Just a word about that coming together to look at the nation's history. I do have a question, but Bacon's rebellion of 1676 is when we can see the white elite say, you know what, these indentured servants are creating a problem for us, so we're going to have a racialized hierarchy. So that's when it begins, where you start to see enslavement of Africans begin. But I want to talk about the 1898 white supremacy campaign. I'd never heard of that till I moved to North Carolina, and it's fascinating. This is the 120th year, and North Carolina has done well in terms of getting the facts, trying to figure out exactly how many black lives were lost in that, that only coup d'etat, meaning an elected Republican government, was actually by force replaced with white Democrats in 1898. Because there had been a fusion politics alliance between white populists and black Republicans, and it was successful. The elections of 1894, 1896, you saw a lot of black Republicans. When I say a lot, you saw persons get elected, you saw persons appointed by white Republican presidents. The question I have is, we have seen great strides in the face of great resistance. This last November election, Charlotte, North Carolina elected their first African-American woman as a mayor. That was major. In Salisbury, North Carolina, where I serve at Hood Seminary, we did the same. We have a very capable black female mayor elected as well. However, going into these 2018 elections, we still have done nothing about the gerrymandering that the Supreme Court has already said is illegal. We have a real serious issue in terms of persons wanting to push back on who's going to be able to vote in this country. But I'm really concerned about the economic Bill of Rights that Dr. King was talking about when he was gunned down 50 years ago, this April of 1968. Dr. William Barber has begun to reignite the work behind the Poor People's Campaign. What will it take for that to become a real viable movement to where we can actually begin to see some leveling so that we can come together and have real change? Because if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense.
All right, wonderful. So let me try to tie in not only what you asked, but the statement and question that was made right prior to yours, that was actually looking for solutions. Here's a challenge, okay? And this is me being upfront with you. The solution is not going to be easy, okay? And because it's not going to be easy, before we rush to a solution, let's deal with the depth of the problem. What I recognize is that oftentimes we talk about matters of race in America, we just like to skate along the surface, as opposed to going deeper and recognizing, again, which connects to what Dr. Grant just said, is that this is all by design. This is not happenstance. These realities were created by somebody in power, and it has done great harm and continues to do harm to our communities today. So if you, frankly, want to be part of a solution, you frankly must want to also be part of a revolution. And I want you to hear me, because we have, I'm saying generally, celebrated the fact that black faces appear in new spaces but don't change the realities of those who remain within the community. So you may be, and I'm not knocking it, you know, wonderful. You got black faces in new places. How is that impacting black poverty? How is that empowering the education system? Who's got food now who didn't have food last week? If you've not changed those realities, you've really not done much at all. Furthermore, I might not get invited back, Joe. Thank you so much for allowing me to come. Furthermore, what I've recognized is in many cases, black politicians are just the handmaidens of the white elite. I'm really not coming back after I say this. Not only that, but most black pastors, a good number of them, operate from a white supremacist mindset anyway. They too worship a white God, which makes sense if that's what you've been fed in your seminaries and in your churches. So I'm not impressed. There may be some hip-hop folk in here. There's a group by the name of Outkast. I'll give you the kind of cleaned up version. But they basically said, not everyone with dreads is for the cause, which means that black pigmentation does not mean you're part of my liberation. So to me, the test is still before you. You've got people in place, but what are they doing? And in order to do anything, listen to me, you've got to do something radical. Because the things that have shaped the realities that we live in today were radical themselves. So now I had the great opportunity of bringing to our congregation in Dallas one of the sons of your state, the Reverend Dr. William Barber, and he is picking up this mantle of the Poor People's Campaign, and things are happening all across the nation. Let's be mindful of the fact that Dr. King was killed because of this work. Let's not miss that. We've made Dr. King this civil rights Santa Claus who goes around preaching about dreams. We've not talked about the revolutionary that he was and the fact that this economic Bill of Rights, and even, some of you don't know, Dr. King was an advocate for reparations. I know I'm really not coming back now. So that's a part of the problem as well, okay? That we've got to really commit ourselves to changing not symptoms, but systems. And that's a far greater and harder work. I'm hopeful. I know we can get there. I'm going to give you my hope in a little bit, but I want us to be honest. That's why I spend so much time dealing with the statistics and the realities, because frankly, most of us really don't know how bad it is. We think we do. It's much worse. Thank you.
I'd like to echo the thanks of many people who have been up here before. And not to be superficial, but to pick up on something that you had just started, we're in a quagmire that's not necessarily of our own making, but we find ourselves here. It's very deep, it's very wide. As one of the women had mentioned earlier up here, there are a lot of people here doing a lot of good work, but we all mostly seem to be focused on the here and now. And the history that you have given us tonight is very important to give us context and give meaning to the work. But where is it going? What's the dream? What's the goal? What does it look like on the other side?
Great question. So let's talk about what we thought the dream was and may have misstepped, and now we're redirecting, recalibrating. We thought the dream was racial equality, when we really should have been talking about racial equity. Right? And because we were moving in the wrong direction initially, we said we arrived, when in fact, we were losing whole communities. So what does it look like? Okay, that's a great question. Let me ask you that question in terms of Charlotte. What does it look like? What does racial equity look like in Charlotte? Let me turn the question back on you. Well, what does it look like? What do you aspire to? All the persons in here, because this is enough to change the city. This is enough in here tonight to change the state. It is. So not so much about what my dream is. What is your dream for this city? And how are you willing to work for it to make it a reality? Maybe pose it a different way. You may have something you want to say as well. Let me stop. I want to say something.
Well, one of the things that is always critical to ask when you're asking that question, what does it look like? the other question you have to ask yourself is, what are you willing to lose? And the reason that I pose that question is because, you know, you've seen the video footage of Dr. Waters, and at many of those, actually all of those, I was present, I just wasn't on camera. But we live in the zip code where we worship, where we work. So when the folks that are in my court program talk about gunshots, because I heard them, we've huddled in the hallway of our house because of gunshots in the neighboring area. We, in the last couple of weeks, if any of you all follow my husband, were suspected of being complicit in a drug house when we were calling to report the activity that was going on. And it was only when I asserted myself as a public servant and started naming the various police folks that I knew that the conversation began to shift. So the question is, what are you willing to lose to gain the equity that you desire?
Okay, finally, you ask us a question. What have you heard tonight? And I heard you say that for our community's welfare, we need to go back to the Bible and believing and practicing what God has said. First of all, that there is no slave or free. There is no black or white, male or female. We're all one. And if we believe that, we must believe in God and the moral law. That morality will heal our land. But how do we do this coming together of the minds? How can we really learn to love one another? Not because I'm of a particular culture, but because I'm a human being made in the image of God.
Great question. Biblical witness is, how can you say you love me and you hate my brother? Which begs the question, how many of our forebears actually knew Christ? Can you say you love Jesus and yet you harbor hate in your heart for someone who looks different than you? Can you say that you love Jesus and yet it was by your hand that you penned the gerrymandering maps to disempower communities? Can you say you love Jesus and you participating not just in the redlining of yesteryear, but you know what still goes on today, because those persons who come to your banks, as soon as you see their pigmentation, you disqualify them from your resources? Can you say you love Jesus when, as I heard this past week and thought it was phenomenal, when people of color say something, you say prove it, but when white people say something, you say let's work on it? Can you say you love Jesus when you discount whole communities of individuals who tell you that for generations we have been under assault by police in our community? Can you say you love Jesus when somebody takes a knee in order to be seen, in order that their communities who have been suffering can be heard, but because you worship and deify a white Jesus that fosters under this idea of Christianity when it's actually the worship of patriotism, you tell them, get up from your knee, and you don't acknowledge the things that happen on a daily basis that might bring him to his knees. Can you say you love Jesus when you'll go to bed tonight knowing that children throughout this city will go to bed hungry? Although there's more than enough resources in this land to feed us all. I think Yulise got to it. I mean, she just kind of cut through straight to it. This thing of racial equity means that some folk in power are going to have to not have as much power. Some folk in influence are going to have to share that influence. And you know what that sounds like? Somewhere I read that one day they were gathered together in one place and on one accord, and then suddenly the sound of a mighty rushing wind filled the space where they were in, and Pentecost brought forth. And when Pentecost broke forth, they shared everything they had together in kind, because they love Jesus. We don't need some of the things we suggest we need. You want a solution? Let's have Pentecost. And let our Pentecost not be known in the sermons we preach, in the songs we sing, but how we care for the least of these. That is Pentecost. That is what we should aspire to.
I'm going to jump in and say one other thing, too. That was real powerful. I kind of don't want to, but...
Before you, isn't that, Rev, isn't that a reason that we should not have the mentality of having a poor people's campaign? I don't want to be that mindset. I don't want to be a part of that, where you're going to say, I'm the poor. You're keeping me down. You're not trying to lift me up, because you're telling me constantly that I am poor. I'm not poor. All right, I'm not poor. I'm not wealthy, but I'm not poor. If you give me that mindset and you're going to have a poor people's campaign, you're defeating the cause and causing people to look at themselves in a different way, like they should not have what they should have. Poor people's campaign, that's not. I don't think that's what we need in our country.
In ethics, there's a term called conceptual analysis, and it basically means that as we're defining terms, we come to some agreement upon what the terms mean. I think I understand what you are articulating as it relates to poverty, and I do believe that people created in the image of God have value in and of themselves that is to be celebrated, but that does not discount the fact that there are people who are impoverished who feel crushing poverty. That's right. And I believe there's something very righteous about speaking up for those who are poor and working to uplift them. That's just my opinion. I think there's something very, and then there's persons who argue that Christ has a preferential option for the poor anyway, which I think is fairly accurate. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because He's anointed me to preach good news to the poor. That's right, 14, yes, sir. I think there's something there and something we can ascribe to. This gentleman, sir, was standing before you, then we'll just kind of keep going back and forth. Yes, please.
How you doing? First of all, I appreciate you being here. Very pertinent information. I wanted to know if you can speak to the intersections between people and policy. You spoke about intentionality.
Yes.
And here in Charlotte, there was a study that came out that said that we're 50 out of 50 with regards to upward mobility. Mm-hmm. Now that's being in a city that's the second largest financial hub in the nation outside of New York. And so there's some intentionality when we're talking about the haves and the have-nots. And so I appreciated you speaking to that. I think the only way that I think we need to think about things, how do we institutionalize transformation? Yes. And I think the only way that we can institutionalize it is to ensure that policy supports the uplift of the human condition. And so can you just speak to the kind of intersections between the people and policy, and even intersectionality with regards to how theology plays a part in the whole process?
That's tremendous. I'd like to explore that and talk with you more, just given time, just so I can summarize it. Okay. When I made the statement in terms of electing persons who may look like previously disenfranchised communities and thinking you've really accomplished something, that's really what I was knocking on the door at. Mm-hmm. Because just by having a person in place, but the policies remain the same, right, nothing changes, okay? And so we usually celebrate, look, we got the first whatever who's serving in this capacity, and then sometimes their policies are just an echo of what we've already experienced, right? That's right. And so basically what I'm saying is we have to know and aspire to more. Mm-hmm. And it's the policies, it's the systems that actually change the realities, all right? I think one thing that is necessary, if I can say this, before you even get to the policies, is about the education, voter education, and really making sure people know who they're voting for, and even what communities and organizers are pressing to change those realities, all right? Here's the challenge. There's been very few meaningful changes that have happened in American society or societies at large that have not come about through some type of pressure. Okay? Yeah. Very rarely has it been the case that persons in power have been willing to just yield that power. Sometimes it's when they were forced up against a wall that those changes were made, right? So we're talking about radical revolution and not just accepting what politicians tell you can or cannot be done. Because they'll tell you something can be done when it can readily be done, and if it's not done, you get somebody in office who will in fact do it. That's right. You have that power, all right? Thank you. I can talk to you all day about that, but that's just a quick summary, okay?
Appreciate you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Waters. We met at the National Prison Summit. I'm Dr. Madeline McClinney, President and founder of ExodusFoundation.org here in Charlotte. We run a 24-hour reentry mentoring program for adults. My question is that you mentioned revolution.
Yeah.
But I want to backtrack a little bit because my brother here asked about the dream. Yeah. And I heard you say something about Pentecost.
Yeah.
And then you asked us, what do we need here in Charlotte? So when you talk about mass incarceration, the cradle to prison pipeline, we can stop it immediately by stopping the arrests of people.
Right.
It's that simple. I work with a coalition of 40 agencies here in Charlotte, Reentry Partners of Mecklenburg. Some representatives may be here tonight. If we stop arresting juveniles and adults who have not committed heinous crimes, we can pull people off that prison pipeline. That's one thing we can do collectively here in Charlotte, is band together and work with our judges and our prosecutors and the police department to talk about how to make that happen. And so that's an answer to your question. But then I want to know about the revolution. What do you have in mind?
Oh, Lord. Amen.
And when can we get started?
First, thank you for your work. And thank you for the many of you who I know are engaged in this work as well. Come on. Thank you so much for what you do. And my statement tonight is not to suggest that no one is working, but it is to echo Scripture that the harvest is ripe, but the laborers are few. And hopefully more will commit to the work. Now, what was said is absolutely right. There's some issues that really are relatively non-issues if we just change the way we do things. Here's the challenge. In order to change the way we do policing and incarceration in America, that means we're going to start messing with somebody's profits. Yep. You won't be able to charge folk 13 cents to make your furniture in the prison anymore. You won't be able to have prison bed quotas where municipalities must pay more money for every empty bed so they have a greater investment in keeping beds filled. You won't be able to do that. If you really change this system, we'd recognize, frankly, that we're sending black folk to prison for things that white folk are making millions of dollars off of. It's fascinating to see what's going on with cannabis across America and how many black bodies remain behind bars where others are making major investments, okay? So I will save my statement as a conclusion, grand finale, if you will, in terms of what my hope and what my vision is and where I believe we're going. So we'll take these maybe final two. I keep looking to make sure I'm together, and then we'll go. Please.
And particularly when you're talking about changing things, one of the biggest things that you all can do is to know the information. Don't just accept the narrative that's being told to you because as my sister in the back talked about how you can change it by just stop arresting the folks. Well, how many of you will hear politicians say, but this is public safety. We're keeping our streets safe. We're keeping our neighborhoods safe. Are you really keeping your neighborhood safe by incarcerating people who really don't need incarceration, just need social services, just need support, just need connection to social networks that actually have resources? So when you start to think about those kinds of things, when you hear, if you're really wanting to be about the change, then understand what the problem is and understand what viable solutions are, because locking folks up is not doing it.
Thank you. These last two, and then we were
just a couple of
yes.
points. One, the Sheriff's Department has recently eliminated, or in the process of eliminating, in-person visitation. They have gone into business with a company that does video visitations. Yeah. And the prisoners' families have to pay to be able to do that. So they have, in essence, eliminated contact between prisoners and their families. Okay. I guess the more salient point that I want to make is on Christianity.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Christ in Matthew's states the premise for a better life, for the life that we should live, the Sermon on the Mount. That is something that is not preached that frequently in churches anywhere. We hear all the nice stories and the parables and everything else, but we do not hear the emphasis on the guidelines for the life that Christ says that we must live to have heaven on earth. And I think if we, individuals, the church, get to the point of preaching Christ's message on where we should be, what we should be doing, who we should be, we change the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. I thank you for that statement. Absolutely. And Brian Stevenson, many of you know Brian Stevenson's work. One of the things that really inspires me about this work is he talks about the necessity of being proximate to pain. And being proximate to pain, being close to those who are suffering. There is something about coming alongside those who are suffering that allows you, frankly, to be restless until their suffering is alleviated. And I'm always mindful of all of the spaces and bubbles that we abide in that allows us to very readily discount suffering. Don't have to look in that direction and keep on moving about our day as we always do until we're able to kind of push through those divisions and see where there is deep suffering, even within our own city. We won't be able to bring about the changes that are needed. Sir, you have the final question for tonight.
Yes, sir. I'm glad to be here tonight. My name is Nathan Alexander. I'm a retired veteran.
Thank you for your service.
26 years from Baltimore, Maryland. And, I'm just thankful to say that because we're talking about so many things, and to veterans who go out there, you know, we talk. First of all, I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, as I mentioned, and that flag, which was made by Mary Pickelskill there, was made in that same district I grew up in. Mm-hmm. So I take major offense when I hear people say, especially say that I'm African American, that you're not patriotic, especially when I'm hearing guys who ain't got a bit of, I don't think I have much of an ounce of patriotism in them. It's just a bunch of fronting. You know, I grew up there, and it's hard to come out of Baltimore and not be patriotic. But at the same time, I'm very Thurgood Marshall-minded in a comparison to a Clarence Thomas type guy who didn't say anything for 10 years until the other Supreme Court magistrate dies. You know, I'm not there. That's why I couldn't sit there for so long. Now, I was supposed, the last military tour I went on, I was supposed to leave from Fort Bragg, go to Korea, and return back to Fort Bragg. You know, that was in black and white orders, very clear and specific. But when I did 80% of my assignment, they said, you're not going back to Fort Bragg, you're going to Fort Campbell. Another little demographic that kind of, to mess the family up, and then if something happened negative with the family, it's going to be blamed on, he's a black male, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, And so I didn't come out of the military looking to be handed any job or want to be a politician or whatsoever. Even though when I was down at Fort Bragg, Fort Campbell, one of the things we got to do, we went down to Louisiana and war trained when some of these situations was going on. So the other major military guy I heard stuff around about in this town was General Petraeus. And I was in the 1st Brigade, they were in the 3rd Brigade. We whipped them often when we went down there, but look who's the hero. We don't get to see the other side of some of them stories that make people heroes, because it's mainly off the backs of the enlisted people like myself that they end up making stars and gain glory. And I think he's well worthy of it, per se. But, at the same time, he's got to be held accountable for his actions, and that's one of the reasons he was around in Charlotte, because he was being held accountable for his actions. Now, I went to a town meeting during the Veterans Day time frame up there in Iredell County, and the Iredell County Commissioner is a general and a veteran. I met a couple of them here. From the general from Spartanburg down there, it's a retired general who's Billy Graham. Billy Graham, a great known guy around in the Charlotte area, I think, is his personal pastor. And I told a bunch of them about a couple incidents that's happened with me now that I'm back in America living. Yeah. Not dead, because I was dead in the box. They would say he was a great old guy. He was this, that, and the other. Well, I'm living there, proving and show me that. When it comes time to go out here and get a job, I just go out and go to get a postal job, and I'm discriminated against. Not because my scores were low, but because they were higher than others. Yeah. And then they just said, we'll toss you a little lawsuit money, and this will be satisfactory. I'm just mentioning some brief things here. I'm down here coming back through Union County from a funeral from one of my friends in the church. Mother's passing away, and the police officer pulled me over for a ticket, and the first thing he does is go straight for his pistol, because I just look like some ordinary guy, till he found out I'm a military veteran and an ordained minister. Then he apologizes. When I go to the courthouse, the ladies there at the metal detector said that's not their normal policy. But see, some people automatically say, well, they're just doing their job. That's their normal. What if he makes a mistake and shoot me? For nothing almost. And I'm out there at Iredell, some up there at Iredell County, the police have violated these people's rights, run in and rush out their house. They may be doing some wrong things, but they have rights still.
Let me ask you a question. What is your name again, sir?
Nathan, which means gift of God. Yeah. Eugene, courteous spirit. Alexander, help of mankind. If I just live up to my name, I'll be okay, right? Yeah. But the greatest name is Jesus.
Thank you. Nathan, I want to, first of all, thank you for sharing your story. Mm-hmm.
But there's so much more to be continued.
I'm sure.
But we have a very cooperative crowd. And this one of these battleground states, I think progress is going to be made against all odds.
I want to affirm a few things, though. Again, I am appreciative, not only for your service, but for you sharing your story.
Well, I do that all over again. Yeah, because I know what it meant. I've been to career 6 times. That's 6 hardships to it. Right. One time God told me to tell Kim Jong-un to shut his mouth before he be annihilated. And
Nathan,
I told the South Korean
Nathan,
president
I'm going
that.
somewhere right quick, okay? Hold on, walk with me. I want to thank you again for sharing your story. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, I'm not sure if collectively we heard the story.
Okay, yeah, so much.
Okay, listen. We have a veteran of our nation's military who just told you he was in fear of his life. Because he happens to be a black man in America. There are very few people who really understand what that means. That there is no amount of service to your military, no number of degrees that you can hold that will save you from that experience. And I heard it, and I think, and I don't want to speak for it, there may be other black men in this space who, as this gentleman was speaking, was revisiting along with him your own experiences. And it terrifies you every single time. The near misses that if I had moved too quickly, put my hand here to get my registration, that my life might be taken. It's important, and I want to say this as we're getting ready to conclude, that we hear the pain of those around us and really understand how the system of racism has really impacted us. So I want to conclude our night tonight. I want to thank Elise for her inspiration. She is a daily inspiration to me in the work that she does, in the lives that are changed. The book is entitled Stakes is High, Race, Faith, and Hope for America. And if you're interested, we have copies available for you. It's been great to go across the nation, sharing with groups, the churches who are studying it, mosques and synagogues. Of course, we've been to Duke. It's at Yale. Just found out Princeton has used it. I'm having a conference call with Wake Forest University in a day or two. It's just been unbelievable, the spaces and places and individuals who are engaging this text. The name is Stakes is High, Race, Faith, and Hope for America. And the question is always, every time we share, Waters, get to the hope. Where is the hope already? Waters, you've given us all these things. Where is the hope? My heart and desire is that ours tonight would not be a falsified hope. A falsified hope to me is that if we go from this place and we think that if we just pray together more, the problems will be fixed. Falsified hope is that somehow just a kumbaya moment and there will be no problems anymore. We are going to march together for the MLK weekend. We're going to do a pulpit swap between the churches. Or even that the hope is simply that I'm going to take my group and we're going to volunteer at the impoverished school and we're going to feel very good about our time with those kids. And go home and do nothing to change the policies that impact their daily lives. So I want you to do something, if you're willing, which is to grab at the hands of the persons in closest proximity to you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the hope. You are the hope. That is my message. We know what needs to be done. May God give us the courage to do it together. There is no magic potion. There is no magic formula. It will be as it has always been, God's people standing up for righteousness' sake. It will be Tubman. It will be Sojourner Truth. It will be Ida B. Wells. It will be King. It will be Fannie Lou Hamer. It will be those who look upon society and say, enough is enough, and even at the threat of my very life, I will work till God's kingdom is on earth as it is in heaven. There's more than enough power in this room right now to bring forth the Charlotte we all aspire to have. What it's going to take is each other, working side by side. When I had the opportunity to pray at the House of Representatives, this is my prayer, and this is our prayer for you tonight. Don't let go of the hand. Listen to this prayer.
The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, the Reverend Dr. Michael W. Waters, Joy Tabernacle AME Church, Dallas, Texas.
Immutable God, greater than all that has or ever will be conceived, hear our prayer. For ancestors at rest in the abode of angels, accosted and assaulted while present upon these shores, enduring avalanches of animus never atoned. For babies bombarded by bombs, bounties placed upon their beautiful heads at birth. For the cacophony of cries citing crimes against humanity, callous cycles of crisis with casualties colored in chalk. In your name, we shall resist evil by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Grant that we become drum majors of justice, promulgators of peace, architects of America freed from greed, hate, oppression, racism, suppression, indeed the very threat of tyranny, replete with liberty and justice for all. Till that great day when lions shall lie down with lambs and we study war no more, when justice flows like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream, and all God's children are finally free. Amen.
If you are willing
The chairs examine the journal
to be a part of the new architects of a new America, even as your hands are clasped, will you stand? Now let us change from hands in hands to arms locked in arms. Off the banks of the Alabama River in Selma, there is an old depot that used to house black flesh, to hold it until it was time for the auction. The boat came down the Alabama River. Human cargo was unloaded, stuffed into small spaces. Having journeyed a far distance from home, standing together in the dark. And the story is told that as they stood there, one of the elders present would begin to speak beyond their present circumstance to the truth of their creation. And in that space, shackled and bound, they would speak these words one to another. I see your greatness. Charlotte, tonight I see your greatness and the courage that it took to be in this space and to hear uncomfortable things. I see your greatness not just in the passion within your remarks, but by the commitment on your faces. Let this night have meaning beyond this night. Let this night be the beginnings of the revolution. May we ultimately go forth from this space to affirm the divinity within all of us and to liberate the captive among us to the glory of God. we can do it. We must do it. And we will do it together. God bless you all.
Bless you.
You can't let this be a kumbaya moment, right? We know that it is God's will for us to hear hard words and to be made uncomfortable. It's the beginning of hope. You've done this for us. I said in a sermon a few weeks ago, if you only hang around with people that are like you will become ignorant and arrogant. Yulise said, what do we need to lose? The first thing God would have us to lose is our ignorance and our arrogance. We got plenty, because we're just people. So keep this conversation going. If you don't believe something they said, go watch. You're going to put in video time. You're going to watch dumb stuff like Carolina basketball on TV. I know. Take some of that time and see the movie 13th. You will be shocked at what Republican and Democratic administrations have done intentionally to squelch black votes and society. See James Baldwin's movie, I Am Not Your Negro. Unbelievable. Read Michael's book. The most powerful thing in your book, I think, is when you rehearse these police shootings that we have seen on video, and when we see it, we think, did I just see that? And yet it goes on, and we move on. So let's shed our ignorance and our arrogance. Talk to somebody you don't know, not just tonight, and the rest of your life. Don't hang around with people that are just like you. God's going to do a great thing through us. It's the beginning of something big. I can feel it. We know it. God's Spirit's moving. Michael and Yulise, God bless you, and thank you so much.